I'm Ben Sebastian, here with my co-host S.A. Baz Collins for this week's Written on the Edge, Season 10, Episode 17 interview. We'll be talking with John R. Gordon and discussing his novel, Mother of Serpents. So let's get to know our guest. John R. Gordon lives in Shepherd's Bush, London, England. He's a screenwriter, playwright, and the author of 9 novels, Black Butterflies and Warriors and Outlaws, both of which have been taught in the USA, Faggamuffin, Color Scheme, Souljah, Drapetomania, and the interracial YA romance Hark. He writes for the world's first black gay television show, Patrik-Ian Polk's Noah's Ark, for which he received an NAACP Image Award nomination. He's the creator of the Yemi Femi comic for adult readers. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm honored. Thank you.
Well, it's our pleasure, and I hope I didn't butcher any of those book titles.
No, well, funny enough, I mean the only weird one is Drapetomania, but then which is an invented psychological syndrome wherein an enslaved person seeks to escape even a kindly master.
Oh, wow.
But then I always thought it was Drapetomania, which is how I always tell people to say it. But then I listened to there's a woman called Joy DeGroy who had an absolutely fascinating she does a whole thing about post-racial traumatic syndrome. It's incredibly interesting, but she always said Drapetomania, and I thought, well, I can't really say I know better than her, but nobody's really said it within living memory because it was this stupid made-up thing in the 1840s.
Gotcha.
But thank you. Yes, no, otherwise everything was
Tomato,
wonderful.
tomato, yeah, yeah.
So, you've obviously made a career steeped in writing, but
Yeah.
where did that first urge to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard come in?
Um, I think, I started off kind of wanting to be an artist, but art isn't very good for telling narrative. And I realized I wanted to tell stories. I mean, I think like everyone, most of us will have grown up loving various children's books, and loving being carried off into these magical other worlds. So I love things like, I don't know if you ever read Wind in the Willows,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
like, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating reading it now because you go, okay, so there's a whole class thing, mole and rat,
Yeah.
gentlemen bachelors of modest independent means, Toad is an aristocrat. The weasels and stoats are, the lower orders. And Badger is a kind of crusty old Oxford professor type, eccentric, So it's interesting revisiting it. And of course also the it's an Edwardian book, and at that time there was very much a sudden uprush of fascination with paganism.
Hmm.
So there's that incredible chapter in Wind in the Willows where the otter's child goes missing, and Rat and Mole go, he might have gone over the weir, and they row to this island, and the great god Pan is there, and they worship him. They find the otter's child sleeping between his hooves. And then they all fall asleep and they wake up and they can't really remember. There's just a sense of the wind in the reeds.
Yep.
So, so sorry, that was already a digression. But there were two sort of sets of things that really made me want to write, and which have kind of come together in this, I suppose. One of which is I absolutely loved and was powerfully politically motivated by 50s and 60s African American writers, particularly James Baldwin, particularly Chester Himes, Richard Wright. And so I read all their books, and I read a lot of letters and uh, interviews and essays about them. So they particularly inspired me because you could sort of, okay, you can really do this, you can really write what you like.
Hmm.
And at that time, well, and also I read people like Malcolm X, George Jackson, a lot of the Black Power writers. And to me, they were a weird analog as a gay man looking for a sort of politics that there wasn't queer studies then. This would have been, the early 80s.
Hmm.
And in fact, a lot of those books drifted in and out of print. I mean, all the copies I have of them as like Malcolm X's autobiography, it's like the crumbly mass market paperback.
Right.
But they kind of modeled a politics of how one might conceive art in an activist way. I mean, one of the reasons I ended up loving Toni Morrison later was she so unapologetically went, well, this is my activism. I don't stop writing to go off and bang on at a rally. This is my activism, publishing people, which I also do, and expressing these things, you know. So there was that very strong thread, you know. With James Baldwin really showed, like when I read Another Country, you can just write exactly the things you're interested in. You can have gay characters, interracial, black. You don't have to do more what Tennessee Williams, who I adore, also did, where you go, okay, can't really have a gay man. He's a bit minor and tragic. The strong woman's the main character, and I love his stuff. But you know, that was a generation before that.
Right.
And then the other thing I loved, which informed this book, was really randomly for my 18th birthday, someone gave me a biography of H.P. Lovecraft that was a remainder book from a library, and all his stuff was out of print. You know, people just didn't know who he was. And so I sought out books. I found the autobiography by L. Sprague de Camp fascinating. And so I'd find his books, and it was like secret knowledge, because, you know, they were hard to find. And through him, I read a lot of other horror writers like Arthur Machen and William Hope Hodgson, people like that. But I also loved Mervyn Peake. Do you know the Gormenghast trilogy?
No.
Mervyn Peake was yet another one who kind of went insane towards the end, a wonderful poet and illustrator. And he wrote this series of 3 books, Titus Grown, Gormenghast and Titus Alone, and they're set in this kind of monstrous, feverish Gothic castle. And everyone's on the verge of madness, as he was himself. And all the names of all the characters are very, the butler's called Flay, the cook is called Swelter, Lord Groan goes mad and believes he's an owl, Titus is his heir. And it's just that whole fantasy world that I think is very appealing. I mean, he's got quite a difficult style. He couldn't do dialogue at all, so everyone's giving each other these looks that are ludicrously meaning in it. It's a terrible influence that you can't let seep into your work. Along with, speaking of bad influences, I absolutely love Faulkner. We actually studied Faulkner at school, incredibly. We studied As I Lay Dying.
Really?
And then later on, I was like, well, it's a shame they didn't say anything about the Civil War. And, you know, we didn't get the context at all. But, you know, for power of writing, Faulkner's brilliant. Who was the other one I was thinking of? For storytelling, I still adore Tolkien. It's just such a good... He knows how... apart from everything, that's just a really good technique, which is, of course, with fantasy. We all know you're just making it up as you go along.
Right.
So how do you kill off that effect, you know? And what he does, which I used a lot in Drapetomania, which is set in a fictionalized 19th century Deep South, he would just drop in information earlier on. So when you got anywhere, when you arrive at the mines of Moria, there's been, you know, probably about 20 little oblique references to them before. So you feel like you've come to a place that you sort of know something about and therefore is in some way real. So that's something I revisit just for the power of storytelling. And I think comparatively, I've read criticisms of his views on race, but I think for the time he's quite progressive. When they asked him if he was Jewish when they were going to do a German version of The Hobbit under the Nazis, and he went, well, I regret I have none of that noble Semitic blood in my veins, but if the question's a prerequisite, I withdraw the book from publication. You know, now a lot of people would have banged on the equivalent of social media and still published it. He didn't. And there's a very interesting bit near the end where Frodo and Sam witness a battle with the Southron warriors and the Oliphant and all that stuff. And actually, and the narrative always defaults to the most human, relatable character. So at that point, we're seeing Sam's point of view. He sees the dead warrior. And actually, his thought is, wouldn't he rather have stayed at home? He wondered, wouldn't he have just been happy and not been caught up in this war? So it's a moment of relating rather than grotesquely.
Right.
But anyway, so Mother of Serpents
I was
is a
going to
kind
say,
of
let's bring all of that
yeah,
to Mother of
to
Serpents.
Mother of Serpents. So that Mother of Serpents is a convergence of me wanting to center a black, in this case, African American character as the main character, and also wanting to do a novel that reads like a classic horror tale, which beautifully The Guardian went, feels like classic Stephen King.
Nice.
Yes. But also I love I don't know if you know the English writer M.R. James. He was again an Edwardian writer. He was actually gay, but in this very low-key academic way. He was a tutor at Eton, the famous swanky boys' school, and a professor at Oxford. And he would write stories, and they were always about a professor coming across something weird and uncanny. And so what he could do was effortlessly capture that sort of academic milieu. And yet he moved the ghost story on from the pale girl warning you know, don't go in the room, to these strange, more visceral creatures. And I think he was part of a paradigm shift to a more modern notion of horror, which is just more embodied and physical. So, you know, in one of the stories, a man gets a book of valuable antique plates and etchings and illustrations, and one of them is of King Saul admonishing a demon, a biblical reference, and there's this grotesque subhuman figure. And of course, it emerges from the shadows behind him. But it's very physical. You know, he sees a hand. At first, he thinks it's an enormous bird-eating spider. He's going, let's hope not. And then it's this weird thing that has more intelligence than a beast, with a strange shallow jaw and dead yellow eyes, and he faints and actually doesn't get killed. But you know, he was good at this more visceral thing, which also H.P. Lovecraft picked up on, sometimes very clunkily. He's a very uneven writer.
Right.
But that kind of, you know, the masses of feta and tentacles and physicality.
Yep.
And so I kind of wanted to take some of those energies, but also have the feel of a classic story, in the sense of it being kind of pulled back. I don't really find cruelty interesting. You can amp things up with cruelty, and I didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, perhaps it's a little old-fashioned, but intentionally.
But so also harkening back to one of the works that informed you as I was looking through Mother of Serpents, it's also very psychological. Like, is it Verge of
Yeah.
Madness?
Yeah, well, yeah. And that's directly inspired by two friends of mine who had severe psychotic episodes. And one of them who is actually a writer, and what specifically informed this, apart from making me interested in the whole thing, was that his characters often, and he himself, coexist with quite a high level of what we would consider delusory thinking. And you can just actually kind of weirdly live with it, you know. So in one of his stories, someone goes on a date at a bar and it goes away, and he's walking home and he sees an elephant in the street with tiny glass wings fluttering on its back. And he walks on, and that's the end of the story. And so you can live with delusion. So I wanted to, quite happily, quite functionally. So, and I wanted to make Juvone, the protagonist of my book, like that, in that he, as you might have noticed, he's not troubled by seeing odd phenomena particularly. It's that they seem to be hostile, and that they seem to imply that he's falling to bits again. And you know, you move to be with your husband's got the job, you're going to be the stay-at-home dad. And of course, quite often he's thinking, well, I've been here one day, can I not keep my brain on the rails for one day? And of course, because he and the husband have weathered an earlier severe psychotic break, he just can't. His point of view at the start is, I can't. I just can't tell him. I can't go to him. I think I'm starting seeing things again one day into our great new life in the countryside. So I was interested by that pressure, and having um, dated someone who's lived with those kind of things. Um, I felt I knew what the other side was like. Um, I mean, some people have said Jack could be more sympathetic than the white husband, but I think he is quite sympathetic. I think if you've had to cope with these kinds of things, um, you get a bit brisk, maybe.
Right.
But I wanted to mesh that so go right. That is realistic. He can manage what he knows is brain chemistry going wrong, but then here are these different types of, as he thinks, hallucinations, and of course, gradually he becomes convinced that they're real
Hmm.
as they start to manifest in increasingly alarming ways. But again, I wanted a book where you were going, there was no supernatural element. You'd still be interested in the people. You'd still be caught up in their journey
Right.
and struggles.
Well, so, and I want to highlight the people too. So it's a what they would call interracial marriage with
Yeah,
a
yeah,
child. So
yes,
a
yes, yes,
beautifully queer family moving from the city
yeah,
to the middle of nowhere, Maine.
yes. And I was fascinated to that was semi-inspired. A friend of mine who's a gay Nigerian writer who I published actually, and who won an Amdor. Chike Odozie, and he and his partner, who's Japanese American, lived in Fort Greene in Brooklyn. And so I thought, okay, I'll have them move from Fort Greene to my fictional county in upstate Maine. But also I wanted to show, yeah, just the fish out of water contrast that I think any townie can relate to
Right.
who moves to the boondocks. Yeah.
So, and I don't want to spoil anything, so you can tell me I'm going too far. How much of what happens specifically to Devon is in his mind versus the spirits of the area?
Well, it is a supernatural novel.
Right.
It's not, it's a portrait of someone who thinks he's deluded and then discovers he isn't, and then has to cope with the opposite problem. How do you prove something outlandish when you yourself are that classic Gothic classic thing, the unreliable narrator? So as it and every bit of evidence he seems to come across evaporates, and there's one point where he finds an entry in an old diary, and there's a drawing of the creature, and he shows it to the husband. Look, look. And of course, the husband, there's no such thing as a drawing so sinister you're really disturbed. That's the literary conceit. So the husband just goes, well, this is like something out of Dungeons and Dragons. What are you talking about? So, no, no, you've got to take it seriously. And then he suddenly realizes, now I do sound crazy again. But yeah, no, it's a supernatural tale ultimately. And so the documents at the start, because it starts off with 8 different documents, a newspaper cutting from the 30s, a police report from the 80s, a 17th century witch trial transcript. And so these are all things seeding the weird mythology of the area that becomes activated. In fact, becomes activated by a couple bringing their child within the range of this creature's habitat.
Interesting. Baz, did you have any questions?
Yeah, I think my first one is going to be more of a how did you dot 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 in
Hmm.
that, I used to watch Noah's Ark. I could
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
consume a lot of queer content other
yeah,
I'm native and Latino, so but I consume art for primarily Black
yeah, yeah.
audiences. I consume art for Asian audiences. I want to understand what my queer brothers and sisters are struggling with, what their
Mm.
narratives are, and so on and so forth. So there's obviously the question that pops in my mind, and I'm kind of playing an avatar for the viewers and listeners out there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah.
How does an white man get the gumption to actually write for a Black gay TV series, do it well enough to be nominated, and then continue writing about this. And I'm not doing it as a critique of what you're doing so much
No,
as
no,
I'm
but
saying
no,
I'm
but
lauding
yeah,
you
yeah.
for
Well,
stepping
thank
into
you.
that space, because I think a lot of writers, especially white writers, I would think,
Yeah,
have a lot of apologist kind of like, oh, I don't know if I could write that
oh
because
yeah, yeah.
I
I mean,
don't
you've
live
got it.
that
Yeah,
kind, you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And yet
yeah,
I
yeah,
think one of the things we as writers, all three of us as writers, want to encourage, and one of the reasons why we do this podcast
yeah,
is to tell authors to step into those spaces that may not be
yeah.
100%, their own experience, but just to
Well,
realize that at
yeah,
the root is the humanity that we all
yes,
share, and
absolutely.
everyone's journey is so individualistic that
Yeah, yeah,
no
yeah.
community is a monolith. So I think as writers we can write from
Yes,
that
no
perspective,
community
right?
is a monolith.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, so that's right. Yes, yes. No, no, I completely agree. I mean, interestingly, Toni Morrison said that when she taught creative writing, she was like, write about something you want to understand. Because she just said, otherwise, you're all going to write about failed romances, because that's your entire experience when you're in.
Write what you don't
And I thought,
understand. All
right, well,
others
you
are
don't
failed
understand, try
romances.
and,
I think we need that
yeah,
as a t-shirt.
well, let's face it, when you're, 18, um, but I mean, in a way, the easiest way is to be biographical about it. My best friend Ricky Beadle Blair is a black gay British playwright and filmmaker and men's one dramaturg, and we run Team Angelica together, our publishing company. And how can I tell this really quickly? He wrote the screenplay of the original film of Stonewall, not the other one, the one before that.
Okay.
And as you know, normally the screenwriter doesn't get to go anywhere, but sadly, Nigel Finch, the director, died of AIDS. He died while he was editing it. And so very unusually, Ricky became this film's representative on the festival circuit. At that time, Patrick Polk, who created Noah's Ark, was working at MTV in their film department. And Patrick was doing what they always tell you to do adaptations of, Bret Easton Ellis or whoever's fashionable. And Ricky
Hmm.
said to him, which is what he always says to everybody, why not write the thing you really want to see? Write the thing, tell the tale you alone can tell. Patrick went off and wrote what became a pilot episode for Noah's Ark, got money from the Black AIDS Institute to make this little low budget one-off thing. That went around the festival circuit. Logo TV had just started and they were looking for someone who could plausibly make a TV series on a budget. That was how Noah's Ark happened. By the time, so I met Patrick through Ricky, and by the time that happened, I'd known Patrick for 10 years. And I just became, maybe this is a good moral for careers generally, I started going, oh, I'll read that play. I'll read that screenplay. I'll give you my penny worth if you like. So I became another reader for Patrick. And then he discovered, I really knew a lot about James Baldwin. I mean, I've got about 10 biographies up there. And I knew a lot about the Harlem Renaissance. And so we'd sort of have a lot of low-key conversations that I was into African American culture in a particular way. And then, when you're doing a low budget thing, you want people will have your back. So he knew Ricky would have his back, knew I would have his back. And so we came on as I was the junior script editor. And then, in the second series, we okay, I proved I could do it. So we all wrote some episodes, but we all storylined together. So it wasn't like I could go away and write something wayward and then the actors had to say it. Everyone was reading everyone's script. And then I ended up co-writing that spin-off film because Logo didn't have enough money for a third series. So they went, we've got half the money. And Patrick said, well, we could make a feature film. And we actually wrote a whole storyline with Q Alan Brocker. And then whoever had commissioned it, they'd all left. So that went in the bin. And then we had to come up with a whole other one. And that was the one that I'm very proud to say got an NAACP Image Award nomination. So I had the privilege of being invited into the room, but that only worked because that was based on knowing I could do the work. And was this through, I think through Patrick, I wrote Bobby Blake's autobiography, The Porn Star. I think that happened through, yes, it did happen through Patrick. He handed me a phone on the set and went, reach out to Bobby Blake. I was like, oh, okay, well, I've seen loads of his movies. And, you know, I ended up recording 16 hours of conversation with Bobby and then turned it into a book. But again, it helped that I was interested in African American culture and I could key into certain things and ask certain questions that if you don't know anything, you don't even think to ask the questions.
Right, right.
So it was kind of that way. I mean, you know, I'm also interested in language and slang. The book I'm doing now is very much based on, it's very London-y, based in the Ends, which is the equivalent of the project. Have you ever seen Top Boy on Netflix?
I know of it, but I have not seen it. Yeah.
Well, if you want to know how the characters talk, it's like that. And now, funnily enough, because of that show, finally, there are American people who can do really accurate British accents. That didn't used to be a thing, but now you'll get somebody doing a little video, black guy, and he'll go, yeah, man's from Croydon Ends, blah, blah, blah. And then he'll suddenly go, psych, I'm from Alabama. Oh my God, you were really convincing. So it's becoming a fabulous, you know, I think language is always renewed from underneath. So of course, although it's irritating to hear suburban housewives go, you slay girl, or whatever, you know, you can't in any case fossilize and gatekeep culture.
Right.
It just doesn't work. So you might as well swim with the tide only faster and just go, okay, accept that now the suburbs know, you know, what voguing is, you know. So I think that happens naturally anyway. But
Nice.
I think we're in a political moment where, frankly, relating across difference is quite morally important.
Well, what I love is that you're stepping into that space with an inquisitive, open heart. And I think that the community that you're writing about will understand that and get a feel for that.
I hope
But
so.
and you know, because I'll share a tiny story. I went to a reading once, and there was an author who wrote a story, and my being Native American and my husband is also Native, we were both there at the reading. And in fact, I was going to do a reading of my book about my Native characters, you know. And she was telling this story and she kept referring to the Native American as Native American. She never identified what nation they were from. And literally, I'm sitting there in the chair going, because you just want them to commit, because you can't paint with so general a brush that you don't really get a sense of who they are. And it's just, I wanted to scream, tell me who they are, you know. But that's what I wanted to get from you, was that essence
100%.
of how you walk into it and how you evolve it from that place of inquisitiveness, you know.
Well, I think absolutely. Well, I mean, it's like, you know, as you I'm sure noticed, there's a Native American element to Mother of Serpents. And I thought, well, exactly what you said. Okay, what tribe is it? What nation is it? What language is it? And I thought, okay, the Abenaki. And, you know, it's conditioned by internal and external things.
Right.
You know, the best online dictionary of phrases I could find was Abenaki. And I thought, okay, I think this is about the right geography. And I read that amazing, I've put it away somewhere, 500 Nations, which is a wonderful repository of history and images and details. But then I sort of doubled back, and the owl lady, who is a trans character, is of mixed heritage. So her sense of her own Abenaki side is very fractured because it's terrible. I forget the ins and outs, but you know, she's abandoned by her father quite early. She has a loving grandmother, but she passed too young, because I think as we get older, we all go, I wish I'd listened to Granny. She was lovely, but I don't remember anything, you
Yeah,
know.
the exuberance of youth, and you overlook those things from your
Yeah,
elders. Yeah,
absolutely. And
yeah,
you, if you think at all, you think, well, later on I'll be able to, and then you can't. So I was doing my best to be mindful exactly of that and go, okay, let's make it specific, but let's make her someone whose sense of her own culture is quite limited and partial.
right, right.
So she's grown.
Which is a valid experience for a lot of natives in this world. Yeah.
Well, it seems to me anyone who's, oh, I saw that amazing documentary over Christmas. I don't know if you've seen it about the missing children, the really moving, really interesting, but again, rather like the Aborigine school kids in Australia, where they were forcibly westernized and all the fractures and psychological fractures of that. It was, yeah, I don't need to say to you very moving, because of course it was very moving.
Yeah.
But I think so. I think I managed to find a parallel to something that is true.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
I researched further back and found out a bit about the red paint people who've totally passed. So very little is known about their culture. And so I felt I could take an aspect of them and have them dealing with a localized problem, this creature that's sort of an alien that's filtered down from the moon, that they use their beliefs. She's actually, because she's sort of telepathic, she's actually influenced by what they believe. So if they believe they can control her, she believes it too. And they managed to imprison her under a mound in the classic way. And I wanted to use those motifs. And I thought, well, if I am being presumptuous, at the end of the day, you can say, well, it was just a spooky tale. You know, I'm not purporting to represent
Right.
within this town. I'm not purporting to represent that experience other than through those characters in that setting.
Right. Which is how it should be done, you know. So all
Yeah,
the flowers to you for stepping into
well,
that space, because that is, I think, is one of the vastly important messages I think you can bring to the table for a lot of authors and burgeoning authors who might be fearful of doing what you've done.
Oh yes, a lot of the young writers I work with are absolutely terrified,
Of
and
getting it wrong.
yeah, and what it means is that their efforts are always feeble, because well, you know, if you're a minority of any sort, what you get used to is pious Pollyanna character.
Right.
So you go, okay, oh,
Too good to be true. Yeah.
here's the sassy queen, and she's always got the good word ordered, you know, the magical Negro trope and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Because you do need a bit of nerve to be, well, I think the ultimate test, and I have managed to pull this off, is can you do a comedy that gets people from that group to laugh? Because if you can, you did understand something.
Right.
You know. And you know, I have managed to do that in various things. So you know, certainly I've got some understanding, you know.
Love it.
Love it. Absolutely.
So, John, is there anything about Mother of Serpents that we didn't ask that you'd like audiences to know?
I really, as I've gone along, I've become more obsessed with trying to write gripping stories. And so with this, I was really like, okay, how can I bring the value of the really good old-fashioned can't put it down page turner to a story? And obviously it's for the reader to say whether that succeeded. But, you know, I've had very good feedback.
Yeah, the reviews are excellent.
Yeah, you know, and people, you know, some people who don't like, you know, a spooky yarn really liked it. So, but yeah, the side of literature is entertainment that is to serve. It is important to me. So I've tried to do something, you know, that is a gripping page turner and hopefully hammers to an exciting conclusion.
Love it. Are you ready for our get to know you questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Take it away, Baz.
All right. Well, just a brief pause here to say if you're enjoying what we're doing here, please like and subscribe and comment and do all the things. Help us keep the lights on by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/ropepodcast. Or if you want to throw us some pocket change our way, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/ropepodcast. We're doing full movie reactions to queer media and full TV series reactions that I do with another host on our show, Albert Nothlit, and I'm enjoying bringing a lot of queer material to him. This queer Mexican boy in the middle of Mexico who knows that there's a pantheon of queer stuff out there, and it's just kind of wonderful to see someone learn so much about queer culture that he knows is out there, but doesn't know where to start finding it. So please join us for that journey. And, and with our interviewee today, just know that we're trying to do this as a love of our community and a repository of wonderful queer content creators who are doing the work, putting our words out there, and especially in this political climate that we're in now. So every little bit helps. We want to make sure we're here for them and give them a space to have those conversations. So with that, let's wander into the weeds. All right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you name a movie that was better than the book?
Do you know, controversially, I would say that Salem's Lot, the Toad Pooper one, is better than the book, I think. I listened to the book.
Which version?
The Toad Pooper one
okay.
with David Soul.
Yeah.
I just think actually his notion of the vampire as a kind of just a brainless bestial creature was much more disturbing. Stephen King wanted to do Dracula in a small American town,
right?
And he actually creates a very urbane vampire, and I think the screeching horrible blue one is better.
Love it. Okay, well, which fictional character would you most like to be friends with?
A fictional character. God, I don't really know. I'll say something lame. Gandalf.
Yes.
There you go. You could have a spot of tea with. All right. Well, what is the most fascinating fact that you know?
I should have prepared this better, clearly. Sorry.
Okay, well, we can let it go. No
one.
worries. All right.
Did you learn any new facts about that area in Maine that you placed your fictional town?
I looked up a lot of slang. I tried to find New England slang to put in there, but there wasn't terribly much. Funny enough, some of it pops up in Family Guy, which of course is set in New England. Leaf peepers, goddamn leaf peepers.
Research via Family Guy. All right. Well, what was your favorite subject in school?
Art.
Okay. Before making a telephone call, do you rehearse what you're going to say?
No, I just blabber on, as you can tell.
It'll come out in the wash somehow.
It will. No editings for the writing.
Right. Truth will out. All right. So what current event or causes are you most passionate about?
Well, it's horrible to see the kicking trans people are getting at the moment. So I think it's just here and in the States, but the culture inflection's a bit different, but it's just so senseless and vicious and detached from reality. It's part of so much bigoted thinking is projecting something that doesn't exist, hanging your emotions on that. And I know loads of trans people, and they're just ordinary people trying to muddle on through.
Right. Exactly.
But I think it's pernicious. I think the resurgence of racism, the whole anti-DEI thing, is spectacularly pernicious.
Yeah.
Just that whole notion. It's funny, but occasionally I have arguments with people who are suddenly quite conservative on things, and I just say, but when you say best for the job, best for the job always means, well, we think they can do it, and it's our kind of chat. He'll enjoy taking the clients to see strippers at Spearmint Rhino. So, if you're a girl in a hijab, you're not going to be expected to take the clients to see strippers at Spearmint Rhino. You just won't get the job,
Right. Well, I think
So
the biggest shock here in the States with that is that women found out they were part of DEI.
Well, that's hilarious.
They had no clue that they benefited the most from it.
Yeah, and Ishmael Reed, the cultural critic and novelist, said that in the 90s. He would say every time there was a thing about affirmative action, he'd say, middle-class white women are the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action.
Yeah.
And he was right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, if you could visit anywhere in the world, where would that be?
I've been to a few places. It would actually be quite. Oh no, I know. Barrier Reef. I love all those weird creatures, and it would be amazing to. I can't scuba dive, but it would be amazing if I could, and I was there to see all these creatures. Like I love octopi and cuttlefish and squid and all those things, but just the amazing strangeness of it all. I bobbed around under a boat in Tenerife, and the fish will rush in hoping to be fed, and they were just mundane. I mean, none of them were bigger than that, but somehow it was weirdly magical. I was just floating there with a snorkel, and it was disproportionately magical. So yes, Great Barrier Reef.
Love that. All right. Well, who, if anyone, was your first celebrity crush?
Oh, that was undoubtedly Jean Anthony Ray, who played Leroy on Fame.
Yes.
And when he came in and did the dance audition, of course, that was yes,
quite spicy.
Well, and especially for the time.
Oh yeah.
Now we're all used to, we expect the men to all be buff and whatnot, but that was like a firecracker. It was incredibly bold and unusual, and no,
absolutely. We miss you, Jean. All right, so what's your personal favorite recipe that you make, and are you willing to share it with others?
I make quite a good sort of wholemeal vegetable pasta dish. The secret is, which I didn't find out for years and years, chopped tomatoes are what makes the sauce thick and nourishing in flavor and texture. So I dump in loads of chopped tomatoes and sun-dried tomatoes and fry it up with, you don't call them courgettes, do you? You call them zucchini and beans and green beans and whatnot. And it comes out, chilies, garlic. It comes out pretty good.
I love that.
Yeah.
Sounds delicious.
Yes, absolutely.
I have a little left in the pot today.
Nice.
Well, that's it. You made it through the list. Bravo.
Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't think of an exciting fact. I still can't. Of course, I will later.
Yeah, right. At 2 a.m, it'll suddenly pop in. Oh, and you have no one to tell.
That would have been hilarious.
Did you know that cuttlefish were the oldest example of a living fossil?
Well, quite. I did have an argument once with someone who refused to believe that octopuses had beaks. He just wouldn't believe it. Yeah. So that to him was a completely mysterious fact.
Why would you not at least offer enough belief to research it?
Yeah.
Well, this was before the internet.
Okay.
But I literally cooked them. There's the beak. There it is. But I couldn't convince him.
Weird.
He wasn't going to go down to the fish market.
Yes, I went out, found a bird, ripped its beak off, and shoved it in the middle of
it into it. Yes, no.
Talk about
Which
body
seems
horror.
Less likely.
Right.
All right. So, what are you working on next? What's coming up for you?
I'm actually working on two things. One of which is just I'm doing daily drawing to improve my graphic novel comic book skills, because I want to do more with the little characters that you mentioned right at the start, Yemi and Femi, who are two queer black club kids and their friend Mixtape, and they have sort of silly adventures about town. And I did a little graphic novella that we actually got a grant to give away at free at black gay clubs because it had
Nice.
HIV advice in it, all of which now is out of date, really. And it always, I wrote it well, but the drawing was a bit subpar. So I'd like to do more with them and just draw it better. So every day I do an hour's drawing, but I'm also, excuse me, working on a novel called Dead Ends. And it's about, and the ends are like the projects in the States. Um, so it's a word play. And so it's about a bunch of queer black and brown youths who uh, end up fighting vampires. A Neolithic vampire is dug up under a church. A gang tries to steal it because it's covered in jewels. It goes wrong, comes back to life, and our friends have to battle it down. And they're very different from each other, but they're all drawn together by being in some way queer.
Love it.
And the main character is a Somali Muslim boy. Because one of my best friends is Somali, and I thought, well, they never get to have fun in YA novels. I'll have some nerve and I'll do this.
Perfect.
So at least I've got him to read stuff about. I mean, now there's no excuse for not getting stuff right, though. I mean, it's like if you want to know what happens at a Muslim funeral,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you've got some idea. There's no excuse of living
No,
ignorance,
absolutely.
Right.
but there is tone, and so obviously I need him to write it. But I think so. So that's for a young adult audience,
Love it.
and I think I'll see if I can get it. You know, this was with our own small Mother of Serpents was our own small press, and but I think with this I would try for a mainstream press because another young adult novel I didn't really get. You know, the classic thing you go, the few people who read it loved it, but
Oh.
you know,
Well,
I'm not immortal. We want a bit more than a few people. And you know, I actually Googled in a bad temper one day, I Googled, is any sort of fiction actually in demand? And
and
someone had done a meta-analysis of what agents claim to be looking for. And they said, one, young adult, two, hold on to your hat, LGBTQ. It's like, really? They must mean Heartstopper. They must, I mean, they can't mean, you know. Anyway, and number three was horror. And I thought, well, I've got this idea here, a YA novel, horror
Check,
novel
check, check.
about LGBT, and, you know, and with diversity, you know,
right.
which, but I think it's an exciting read. I'm enjoying reading it. And because it started off as a TV idea, and I actually plotted out the entire thing. So for once, rather than constantly breaking off to go, well, now what happens? Or going, this doesn't make sense, or wouldn't they? Well, the usual thing you go, wouldn't they just have told someone, you know? That was fairly much sorted out. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing.
Love it. Where is the best place for people to follow you, get updates for your projects, reach out to you?
Um, they can always, I mean, people are very welcome to email me at john, at teamangelica.com. And the website of teamangelica.com is where all my other books are and links are.
Perfect.
I've got my website is johnrgordon.com. Oh God, I can't remember yeah, Twitter, I'd still at John_R_Gordon,
Okay.
which I think is the same for Facebook. So all of those. But yeah, on my own website, there's kind of intro. It's a bit of a mess, but I've got quite a lot of, you know, bits, photos from productions and things like that. And I went through a phase of, you know, writing a kind of writer's diary, but actually I think, you know, I said some quite interesting things and that's in there as well. You know, if anyone's curious about my writing practice, and I do quite a lot of, you know, mentoring, editing and dramaturging. So I do actually think a bit about what I'm doing, you know. Of course, as you know, the minute you're advising other people, you have to make sense of what your views are, or it doesn't convince
Yep.
them. You know?
Yep. So do you have any final words of wisdom?
Not really. I think, you know, there's that wonderful quote, is it Kurt Vonnegut, make art. It doesn't necessarily make you any money. You may not get famous, you may not get anywhere, but you'll have lived a richer life.
Mm.
And I think that's something that we're having this very weird moment with AI and everything, where there's like a bizarre, well, it's not collective amnesia because it's being imposed on us, but the idea that you should get expressing yourself out of the way so you can watch TikTok or so you can go shopping. That instead of going into yourself, bringing yourself out, instead of connecting with the world, connecting with people, you go, well, I just want to chill.
Hmm.
But you can't. You've got to do something. You can relax when you've done something, and be the change you want to be in the world, do the work that you wish was out there.
That part.
I think that's, which again was, Toni Morrison, of course, said it better than me. But, that was her whole thing was,
Yeah.
And she said that, I think, initially in reference to James Baldwin, to tell the stories that you want to see out there.
Yeah.
And, I might seem a bit odd, but I'm a person of very ordinary abilities. If I can do that, anyone can do that, you just have to decide to and crack on.
Yep.
Yeah.
There you go.
Love it.
Love it.
All right. We'd like to extend a huge thank you to John R. Gordon for joining us. John, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. No, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Thank you for the lovely questions and tact and graciousness.
And when that other work is ready, come back and see us. We'd love to
Oh, yeah. No, I certainly will. I certainly will. I shall.
Perfect. All right, folks. We at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. So if you enjoy learning about new artists or hearing our thoughts on entertainment media, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. The show was produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.roadpodcast.com. Tune in next week for your queer media fix.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.